There is a moment, quiet yet deeply unsettling, that follows a spiritual awakening. At first, the experience feels like clarity flooding in. You begin to perceive life through a lens that is cleaner, more honest, even sacred. The roles you once played, the goals you once chased, and the ideals you once held so tightly all begin to dissolve. What once mattered now feels strangely irrelevant. And yet, instead of joy or liberation, something else arises, an unfamiliar stillness. A heavy pause. You might wake up one morning and feel nothing. No urgency. No ambition. No fire to move forward. The passions that once pulled you forward no longer stir anything inside. Tasks feel meaningless. Relationships feel distant. The outer world, which once dictated your sense of identity, now seems like a foreign stage upon which you can no longer act. You may have asked yourself, why do I feel so unmotivated, even though I just experienced something so powerful? The irony is difficult to ignore. After touching something that feels eternal, why does everything feel so empty? This is not a crisis of failure. This is not laziness. And most importantly, this is not a mistake. You are not broken. You are not regressing. You are not falling apart. You are standing in the quiet aftermath of a deeper truth making its way into your life. This experience is not a malfunction. It is a transformation. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, dedicated his life to understanding the unseen dimensions of the human psyche. His work laid the foundation for what we now call depth psychology, a field that explores the unconscious forces shaping our thoughts, behaviors, and sense of self. Jung was not interested in surface-level fixes. He was drawn to the hidden roots of transformation. For him, spiritual awakening was not a gentle upgrade to one's life, but a profound psychological death. The ego, once the familiar compass guiding decisions and ambitions, begins to dissolve. It no longer knows what to pursue, what to value, or even who it is supposed to be. And in that unfamiliar silence, confusion does not signal failure. It reveals the beginning of a deeper, inner journey. But the silence is not empty. It is the sound of the old self making room for something that does not yet have a name. In our modern world, where success is measured by movement and productivity, this experience is almost always misinterpreted. If you are not striving, something must be wrong with you. If you are not building or achieving, then you must be lost. But this belief is not rooted in psychological truth. It is rooted in cultural fear. And it blinds us to the deeper process that Carl Jung devoted his work to illuminating. You are not lazy. You are evolving. But evolution, when it touches the human soul, does not feel like progress. It often feels like collapse. This is because the structure of your previous life, the psychological scaffolding built from childhood conditioning, social roles, and egoic ambition, has begun to fall away. What replaces it is not immediate. It is not loud. And it does not arrive with a manual. Many people, after awakening, fall into the trap of thinking they should feel more alive than ever. But aliveness is not the same as stimulation. Real transformation does not always feel good. It feels real. And realness often includes grief, confusion, numbness, and deep questioning. Not because you are lost, but because you are finally willing to stop pretending you are found. So ask yourself honestly, do you feel unmotivated, or do you feel disoriented in a world that no longer matches who you are becoming? Have you lost your energy, or have you outgrown the reasons you used to wake up in the morning? Are you falling behind, or are you standing still long enough to hear your true self begin to whisper? This silence you are facing is not a punishment. It is a passage. It is the in-between space that no one talks about, the liminal territory where you are no longer who you were, and not yet who you are going to be. Carl Jung called this the beginning of individuation. Not the path of becoming what the world wants from you, but the sacred path of becoming who you truly are. The confusion you feel is not evidence of failure. It is the signature of transformation. And what waits for you on the other side is not more of the same. It is something entirely new. Throughout this video on the Thinker of Being, we will walk together through the psychological landscape that Jung explored with such precision and depth. We will examine what happens to motivation when the ego no longer holds the map. We will uncover the hidden purpose behind the silence you are experiencing. And most importantly, we will begin to understand why this stillness is not a sign of collapse, but a quiet preparation for something more honest, more aligned, and more real. If these insights speak to something you've felt but could never quite explain, consider subscribing. This channel exists to help you navigate the unseen, to understand the self beneath the noise, and to walk with others who are also learning how to live from truth rather than performance. You are not lost. You are preparing to be found. The most jarring part of a spiritual awakening is not the awakening itself, but what follows it. There is a peculiar silence that settles in after the moment of insight, and in that silence, your familiar motivations begin to unravel. What once made you feel alive, goals, success, identity, routine, suddenly feels weightless, even absurd. You may still remember how to function in the world, but the emotional thread that once connected you to your ambitions begins to fray. You look around and wonder why none of it makes sense anymore. At the center of this unraveling is what Carl Jung understood as the collapse of the ego. The ego, in Jung's psychology, is the conscious self, the version of you that has goals, roles, preferences, and plans. It is the constructed identity that emerged over time, shaped by culture, family, expectations, trauma, desire, and habit. It is the part of you that says, "This is who I am," even when that definition was inherited, not chosen. When a person awakens to something greater than the ego, that construct begins to lose its authority. You no longer feel driven by the things that used to matter so much. But the dissolution of ego does not mean the arrival of peace. In fact, it often means the arrival of confusion, emptiness, and fear. Because without the ego's framework, there is no map. There is no reliable structure to tell you what comes next. This collapse does not always come with drama. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through a growing numbness. You stop reacting the way you used to. You don't feel pulled toward what used to excite you. You can't quite explain it, but there's a deep sense that the identity you spent your life building has become too small for who you are now. And so you drift, not knowing whether you are breaking down or breaking open. In Jung's terms, this is the beginning of a process he called individuation. It is not self-improvement. It is not spiritual entertainment. It is the slow, honest work of becoming whole. And that work begins with loss, the loss of the false self, the loss of certainty, the loss of a world that used to make sense. Modern culture has little patience for this kind of psychological disorientation. When your motivation disappears, people will ask if you're okay. They will suggest you're depressed or directionless. And sometimes, you might start to believe them. But the truth is more subtle. You are not falling apart because you are broken. You are falling apart because you are shedding what is no longer authentic. What used to motivate you was often built on fear, comparison, or survival. Now, something deeper is trying to emerge. It is important to understand that the ego is not your enemy. It is not something to destroy. It is something to outgrow and eventually integrate. In the early stages of awakening, the ego does not disappear. It simply becomes confused. It has lost its familiar landmarks. It wants to rebuild, to re-identify, to find something to cling to. And in this chaos, many people rush back to old patterns just to feel stable again. But if you can stay present during this collapse, if you can resist the urge to reconstruct yourself prematurely, something powerful begins to unfold. You begin to hear a quieter voice beneath the noise. You begin to feel impulses that are not born from fear, but from resonance. And that is the beginning of something real. This moment, this psychological death, is not the end of your path. It is the end of pretending. It is the collapse of a version of yourself that was never quite true, never quite whole, never quite free. And in its absence, you may feel lost. But you are not lost. You are between identities. Ask yourself honestly, have you truly lost your motivation, or have you simply stopped being moved by what never belonged to you? Is your exhaustion a sign of weakness, or is it your psyche's way of refusing to participate in a life that no longer reflects who you are? Carl Jung believed that the collapse of the ego was not a mistake, it was a rite of passage. And like all rites of passage, it is meant to dismantle what is outdated in order to make space for what is real. This is where the journey begins, not with answers, but with honest disintegration. What lies beyond this collapse is not a return to the old self, but the slow discovery of the self, the deeper, wiser center that has been waiting to lead you all along. There is a space between what has ended and what has not yet begun. This space is rarely acknowledged in daily life, and even more rarely understood. After the ego has collapsed, and the familiar identity no longer fits, there is a pause. Not just a momentary stillness, but a profound and often uncomfortable stillness. It is not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of suspension. Nothing feels right to do, yet doing nothing feels just as disorienting. You are no longer who you were, but not yet who you are becoming. Carl Jung knew this space well. He saw it not as a failure of willpower, but as a sacred psychological transition. He described the process of individuation as a journey through inner terrain where the old structures dissolve and the self begins to emerge. But the self does not arrive on command. It cannot be summoned through effort. It comes only when the old has been fully surrendered, and the psyche has made enough room to receive something new. In this in-between phase, most people begin to panic. The ego, confused and without its usual tools, attempts to reattach to any available identity. It may try to rebuild a new persona, rush into new projects, or mimic old goals in slightly different forms. But these efforts often feel empty. The drive behind them lacks the conviction it once had. Nothing clicks. Nothing sticks. You find yourself circling in hesitation. Society has little tolerance for this. In a culture obsessed with productivity and performance, stillness is mistaken for stagnation. If you are not visibly improving, you are assumed to be falling behind. If you are not acting, then you must be failing. This mindset leaves little room for the psychological truth that transformation often begins with deep quiet, with a withdrawal from outer doing and a turning inward. Yet this pause is not a void. It only feels empty because you have not yet learned to see its richness. It is a psychological cocoon, a place where the psyche undergoes invisible reorganization. What you call numbness may actually be your nervous system recalibrating. What feels like confusion might be the absence of artificial clarity. And what seems like apathy could be the refusal to pretend. This pause is not a passive experience. It is a quiet resistance against being prematurely defined again. Something inside you knows that it cannot go backward, but it also cannot fake a future it does not yet understand. That tension, though deeply uncomfortable, is meaningful. It is evidence that you are beginning to move from external guidance to internal truth. Ask yourself gently, are you truly stuck, or are you finally allowing yourself to be still long enough to hear something deeper? Have you really lost your path, or are you being asked to walk without a map for the first time? Jung believed that the modern world had pathologized this sacred pause. He warned that people mistake it for laziness, depression, or dysfunction. But those labels come from the outside. They reflect a misunderstanding of the inner journey. The psyche does not evolve on society's timeline. It evolves when it is ready, and its readiness often begins with retreat. The pause is sacred precisely because it resists the demand to be useful. It does not conform to the language of resumes, accomplishments, or followers. It speaks in symbols, in silence, in the language of the soul. And it is during this space of retreat that the self begins to gather its energy. It prepares not to resume the old life, but to begin a new one with deeper alignment. Do not rush this. Do not try to explain it to others who have never felt it. Trust that your stillness is not a lack of courage, but the beginning of a new kind of strength. One that does not shout, but listens. One that does not grasp, but allows. One that does not perform, but transforms. If you are here, lingering in the quiet, doubting yourself and wondering if you are falling behind, know this: you are not late. You are on time, but your time is not governed by clocks. It is governed by truth. And truth moves at the speed of real change. You are not in the way. You are on the way. It is easy to believe something is wrong with you when your energy disappears. You may find yourself staring at tasks you used to complete effortlessly, now unable to even begin. You may remember what it felt like to be passionate, driven, and full of intention, yet none of those qualities seem accessible anymore. You may even wonder if you have lost yourself entirely. But what if this collapse of motivation is not a sign of damage, but a sign of evolution? What if your mind and body are not shutting down, but rewiring into something more truthful? Carl Jung observed that the psyche has its own seasons. Just as nature follows cycles of growth, retreat, and renewal, the human soul also follows rhythms of expansion and contraction. What appears as apathy or loss of purpose may in fact be a necessary withdrawal. Your inner world is recalibrating, not malfunctioning. You are not broken. You are simply unable to be moved by what no longer aligns with your truth. Before awakening, motivation is often powered by the ego. That motivation, while effective in the outer world, is usually fueled by comparison, fear, validation, or the hunger for control. It keeps you moving, but not necessarily towards something meaningful. It drives you forward, but rarely inward. It is efficient, but often disconnected from the deeper self. And when that egoic engine falls apart, the entire structure of your motivation falls with it. This collapse feels disorienting. You try to rekindle your old enthusiasm, but the spark does not catch. You attempt to set new goals, but none of them resonate. Friends and mentors might advise you to push through, to find your why again, to get back on track. But what they cannot see is that your track no longer exists. And your why has transformed into something that cannot be found through force. Ask yourself, not as a critic but as a witness, why would you still feel motivated by the same things after glimpsing a deeper layer of reality? Would you expect the same impulses to drive you if you no longer believe in the rewards they once promised? The truth is, your soul has outgrown the script. And now, something far more mysterious is trying to emerge. This process is subtle. It does not announce itself with fireworks. You may feel tired more often. You may begin to crave simplicity, silence, or solitude. You may lose interest in things that once gave you identity. These are not failures of energy. They are signs of reconfiguration. Your nervous system is adjusting to a life no longer powered by performance. Your mind is learning to trust different signals. Your intuition, long silenced by efficiency, is beginning to speak again. Jung believed that the self, the deepest expression of your being, cannot be forced into action. It does not respond to pressure, deadlines, or metrics. It speaks through resonance, through dreams, through quiet impulses that do not always make logical sense. The self invites you to move, not for approval, but because something inside you knows it is time. This is not an easy shift. You may feel guilt for not being productive. You may feel shame for not feeling inspired. You may compare yourself to others who seem to be building, striving, achieving. But what you are doing is harder to measure. You are learning to live in harmony with your own rhythm. You are learning to follow a compass that points inward before it ever points forward. There will come a day when something stirs inside you again. But it will not feel like ambition. It will feel like truth. It will not be the loud roar of ego, but the quiet certainty of alignment. You will feel called, not pushed. You will feel moved, not chased. And that movement will not drain you. It will nourish you. You are not unmotivated. You are transforming the source of your motivation. You are shifting from being driven by survival into being moved by soul. And that shift is not a weakness. It is the beginning of wisdom. So when you wake up and wonder why the fire is gone, remember this: it has not gone out. It is being relit by a deeper flame, one that cannot be seen until the old one has finished burning away. Not everyone who experiences a spiritual awakening reaches clarity. For many, the initial glimpse into higher awareness is followed by a strange detachment, a sense that nothing matters anymore. At first, this detachment can feel peaceful. You may find yourself free from anxiety, from the need to compete, or from the chaos of everyday life. But over time, the detachment hardens. It begins to feel like indifference. You stop feeling joy. You stop participating. You no longer care about the world, and you start convincing yourself that this must be enlightenment. Carl Jung warned against this illusion. He understood that true awakening is not an escape from reality, but a deeper engagement with it. When people use spiritual ideas to avoid emotional discomfort, psychological wounds, or difficult decisions, they fall into what is now known as spiritual bypassing. This bypassing is not conscious. It often feels like wisdom. But in truth, it is avoidance dressed in sacred language. You may begin to tell yourself that goals are illusions, that emotions are distractions, that pain is beneath you. You may begin to look down on others who are still caught up in the world. But ask yourself honestly, is this detachment coming from peace, or from fear? Are you truly free, or are you hiding behind a spiritual mask? Spiritual bypassing occurs when you try to skip the hard part of awakening. The part where you confront your shadow. The part where you grieve your illusions. The part where you integrate your human experience rather than deny it. Jung believed that real enlightenment does not happen through transcendence alone. It happens through integration. And integration always requires you to face what you would rather avoid. This is not a judgment. It is a gentle truth. Detachment is seductive because it protects you from pain. It gives you a sense of control. But it also cuts you off from meaning. When nothing matters, nothing connects. And without connection, there is no real life. There is only observation. You become a ghost in your own story, watching instead of living. This form of disconnection can be difficult to notice because it feels more elevated than depression. You are not sad. You are not anxious. You are not visibly suffering. You are simply elsewhere. But this elsewhere has no roots. It floats above the ground where real transformation occurs. Jung taught that awakening is not about escaping the world. It is about seeing the world more clearly, and then choosing to engage with it from a deeper place. It is about honoring the symbolic meaning of life, not rejecting it. When you bypass the emotional and psychological work, you also bypass your own soul. You may gain insight, but you lose intimacy. You may expand your mind, but your heart begins to close. So how do you know if you are bypassing or truly awakening? Ask yourself the hard questions. Do you avoid conflict because you are at peace, or because you fear discomfort? Do you dismiss your desires because they no longer resonate, or because you are afraid to want something again? Do you stay silent because you are grounded, or because you no longer trust your own voice? True awakening does not disconnect you from life. It reconnects you to life in a new way. You begin to care again, not in the way you did before, driven by fear or image, but in a way that feels grounded in truth. You feel called to act, not because you need validation, but because something inside you wants to give. That desire to give, to express, to create, is a sign that bypassing has ended and integration has begun. You are not here to float above your experience. You are here to live it, to touch the world, to feel it fully, and to respond to it from your deepest integrity. That is not weakness. That is spiritual maturity. Carl Jung's wisdom reminds us that enlightenment is not light without shadow. It is the conscious integration of both. And it is through that integration, not denial, that your motivation returns. Not the kind of motivation that hustles for approval, but the kind that flows from alignment, clarity, and connection. You do not need to transcend your humanity. You need to embody your divinity through your humanity. That is the path of real awakening. That is where life begins to matter again. When the old motivations fall away and the detachment has run its course, something quieter begins to awaken within you. It does not demand your attention. It does not shout over your thoughts. It simply begins to stir, like the first warmth of light after a long, dark night. This stirring is not the return of the old ambition. It is the birth of something entirely different. It is not about becoming successful again. It is about becoming aligned. Carl Jung believed that the path forward, after the collapse of the ego and the sacred pause, involves a return to the symbolic life. This is not a metaphor. It is a psychological reality. The symbolic life means living in such a way that the outer world reflects your inner truth. It means allowing dreams, synchronicities, subtle intuitions, and the quiet voice of the self to shape your direction. When you begin to live symbolically, your actions no longer feel forced. They feel like responses to something deeper. Your life becomes a dialogue, not a performance. This is where motivation returns, but it does not return through pressure. It returns through resonance. You are no longer moved by the desire to prove, but by the desire to express. You do not chase meaning. You respond to it. You stop asking what will make you look valuable, and start asking what feels true to give. Ask yourself gently, what in your life calls to you softly, even when no one is watching? What moments, images, or ideas keep returning to your awareness, not as distractions, but as invitations? These are the subtle footprints of the self. They are not loud because they do not need to convince you. They are simply there, waiting for you to notice. Living symbolically requires a new kind of attention. It means learning to listen again, not just to your thoughts, but to your body, your intuition, your dreams, and your instincts. It means noticing what gives you energy instead of what drains it. It means trusting the intelligence of your deeper nature, even when it does not make sense to others. Jung taught that the self, once it begins to emerge, becomes the new center of life. The ego still plays a role, but it no longer leads. The self guides not with rules, but with symbols. It does not impose, it reveals. And when you begin to follow that guidance, your life takes on a texture that cannot be explained with logic, but can be deeply felt. You may begin to notice patterns that were once invisible. A book that seems to find you at the right moment. A dream that clarifies your confusion. A random conversation that feels like an answer. These are not accidents. They are the language of the symbolic life. And when you respond to them, you begin to live in partnership with your deeper nature. Motivation begins to return as a quiet sense of purpose. It may not come with a business plan or a 10-step strategy, but it comes with clarity. You begin to move not because you are supposed to, but because something inside you is ready. That readiness is sacred. It cannot be forced. It only reveals itself when you are honest enough to wait for it. This is not the same as waiting for permission. It is not passivity. It is presence. It is the ability to stay close to yourself until the next right step becomes obvious. And when it does, you will not need to talk yourself into action. You will feel drawn. That pull is not motivation in the traditional sense. It is alignment. And alignment is sustainable in a way that force never was. Carl Jung once said that people are not driven by facts, but by meaning. If your life lacks motivation, it may be because it has been missing meaning. Not superficial meaning, but the kind that resonates in your bones. That kind of meaning cannot be manufactured. It must be discovered. And it is discovered through the symbolic life. You are not here to imitate someone else's idea of success. You are here to live a life that reflects your truth. That life may look simple from the outside. It may not follow the rules. But it will be yours. And in that ownership, your energy returns. Your direction becomes clear. Your motivation becomes real. Not because you are chasing, but because you are finally listening. There is a quiet moment, often unnoticed, when the soul begins to return to the surface. It does not come with a grand revelation. It comes with a breath that feels deeper than usual. A step that feels more grounded. A thought that does not spiral, but settles. After everything has been stripped away, after the ego has dissolved, the pause has been endured, and the detachment has run its course, what remains is a new kind of presence. A presence that does not seek, but recognizes. A presence that does not rush, but trusts. Carl Jung did not promise that the path of individuation would be comfortable. He never said the journey inward would be easy or immediate. What he offered was something far more enduring, the possibility that your life, stripped of illusion, could become a living symbol of authenticity. He believed that the self, once revealed, could become your guiding center. Not to perfect you, but to make you whole. You may have feared that your motivation was gone forever. You may have wondered if you would ever feel inspired again. But now, perhaps you see it differently. The absence was not the end. It was the clearing. The silence was not punishment. It was preparation. And what has begun to stir within you now is not a recycled ambition. It is the return of your inner fire, reborn not from striving, but from truth. This fire does not burn to impress. It burns to illuminate. It glows quietly at first, warming the parts of you that have long been cold. It flickers when you speak your truth, even when your voice shakes. It rises when you act from meaning, even when the outcome is uncertain. It is the fire of presence. And it cannot be lit by anyone but you. You will begin to notice the difference. You will sense when something is aligned, because it will feel effortless in its rightness. You will no longer need to push yourself toward what no longer fits. You will be pulled toward what feels like home. That pull is not random. It is the guidance of the self. Jung often reminded us that symbols carry the meaning our minds cannot hold. The soul speaks in symbols. And when you live symbolically, you begin to move with the rhythm of your own truth. You are no longer a machine responding to expectation. You are a human being responding to depth. So pause for a moment. Ask yourself gently, what is quietly calling to me? What keeps appearing, not because I planned it, but because it feels like it belongs? What moments in my life feel like reflections of something deeper, something ancient, something alive? Your motivation is returning. But it is not the motivation you once knew. It does not speak in deadlines or accolades. It speaks in resonance. It speaks in meaning. And it will guide you not toward performance, but toward purpose. You are no longer here to chase. You are here to express. You are no longer here to fit in. You are here to belong, to yourself, to your path, to your life as it actually is, not as you were taught it should be. This is the moment when everything begins again. Not because you have gone back to who you were, but because you are finally allowing who you truly are to lead. That truth is quiet, but it is steady. And it will take you where you need to go, not quickly, but honestly. Carl Jung once said that people grow better when they are allowed to be themselves. Not when they are forced to change, but when they are supported in unfolding. The journey you are on is not about becoming someone else. It is about unfolding into who you already are, underneath all the stories, masks, and expectations. So as this chapter of silence begins to close, and the first embers of direction return, remember this: the self was never missing. It was waiting. And now that you have stopped searching outward, it can finally speak. Listen closely. Follow gently. The path is yours now.